I'm looking forward to discussing with you different issues surrounding marital self-giving and marital friendship, particularly within the thinking of John Paul II, whose writing has just helped people understand marital love and marital self-giving in a whole remarkable, deeper and newer way. During this discussion, I'm going to do a presentation on some of his ideas in these three basic areas of romantic love, friendship, and betrothed love. And this is from his writing in Love and Responsibility. I think all of you have a handout, should have a handout of a summary of Love and Responsibility. There's another excellent summary of Love and Responsibility done by a Philadelphia priest, Monsignor Vincent Walsh. You can find it at Amazon.com. I had this book on my bookshelf probably for about 8 years and got through maybe 30 pages in 8 years. It's a tough read, but when summarized, it's really very accessible and very encouraging for those of us, for the culture and for those of us in the married state. Again, my own work with marriages and families is very strongly influenced by John Paul II's writings on the human person and love and human sexuality, family, and self-giving. As a psychiatrist, my own particular area of expertise is the nature of anger. So if you do a search on my name, you come up with a textbook at the American Psychological Association books. We'd be delighted to send you for a mere $30 plus change. A training DVD for mental health professionals through the American Psychological Association books with my colleague at the University of Wisconsin, Bob Enright. And so anger is one of the major things that brings children into therapy, married couples into therapy, and single people into therapy. It's one of the major issues that interferes with romantic love, with friendship, and with betrothed love. We have a marital website, maritalhealing.com, which is under development. It presents a number of the obstacles that interfere with marital self-giving. You have a handout here. This is a list of some of the major weaknesses in marital self-giving and affective maturity. These are weaknesses that interfere with both the ability to give love and to receive love, which is essential for a healthy, loving relationship. Not just the giving, but also the receiving. Most of us men need to work on that a little bit more than women do. Okay, well, let's talk about John Paul II and some of his writings about marriage. Then we'll get into some of the psychological aspects of the weaknesses that, fortunately, can be healed. The thing that I find very encouraging about my own work with couples, with individuals, is if you know yourself, if you can really understand the weaknesses you have, which requires a certain degree of humility, and if you're willing to struggle against them, and if you have a faith aspect to your life, there's absolutely no reason why in married life you can't enjoy a deep romantic love, a deep friendship, and a wonderful betrothed love, which is more than sexual intimacy. It is sexual intimacy, but it is more than sexual intimacy. In John Paul II's writing, Letter to Families, which is a great read, he wrote, "Only if the truth about freedom and the communion of persons in marriage and the family can regain its splendor will the building of the civilization of love truly begin." There's some seats up here. And he goes on to write several other things. He writes that we as human beings become the image of God not when we are alone praying to God, but we become the image of God in communion. That is, it's in self-giving, in giving to one another, that we image God. It's not being by ourselves. That's important. Prayer is important, but it's in the union. It's in the total giving of ourselves that we image God. John Paul II writes some remarkable things about marriage and sexual intimacy. He writes that the union of a man and a woman in marriage, in some ways, in a loving union, where you're giving yourself and receiving romantically, in the friendship and the betrothed love, that this union is a symbol to this culture of the Trinity. You believe that? This is the high calling of the sacrament of marriage. This is this part of the splendor of the sacrament of marriage. That our marriages, that the love that we're meant to show to one another and to receive from one another, that this marriage is meant to be, to show, to give the world, the culture that so much needs it, a glimpse of Trinitarian love. Trinitarian love, of course, is the flow of love between the Father and the Son, and the fruit of that love is the Spirit. And our love is meant to flow, husband and wife, and the fruit of that love, our children. And this culture certainly needs that sense of this love. All right, so let's, this self-giving that we're called to, this ability to give to our spouses, to give to God, to receive, this is not easy. This, as John Paul II writes, is clearly a task. It's not easy work. There's one seat up here. But with God's grace and His strength, we can overcome whatever weaknesses we have in our giving and in our receiving in our marriages. God has given us all special gifts. We come into our marriages with very many special gifts, but these gifts are in fragile vessels, and so these vessels need to be taken care of. Because if they're not taken care of, then the self-giving, the loving, is weakened and it's harmed. When I give marriage conferences, I often think of a mural in a chapel in Manhattan, 34th and Lexington. This chapel is on the 16th and 17th floors, right down in Manhattan. And behind the altar is a mural of the wedding feast at Cana. Big mural, probably up to from the floor to ceiling. And in that mural, the Lord is pointing, it's the wedding feast at Cana, and He's pointing to the vessels of water. And Our Lady is here on His right, and she has her hand on His arm, and she's smiling at Him as He's pointing to these vessels of water. And behind Him is all this celebration. All these people at tables, the whole community is celebrating the sacrament of marriage, which is beginning. And He's pointing to two vessels of water. And when I'm in that chapel, and that image comes to my mind, not infrequently during the course of my work, I think of couples. That we are those vessels at the Feast of Cana. And that the water that we have, the weaknesses, or just the human nature that we have, can be transformed, is meant to be transformed. In the sacrament of marriage, through the graces of the sacrament, through our own human efforts, and through our own interior lives, so we can become special gifts, precious wine, not just to one another, but that whole community, that our marriage is important to each of us, but our marriage is very important to the culture we are in. On the street that I live on, small street, there are more fatherless children on my street, children who go to bed at night without fathers, than there are children who go to bed with fathers. So something terrible has happened. Something really terrible is happening. The people don't understand. They don't understand marriage. They don't understand family life. They don't understand the high calling that we have in our sacrament of marriage to one another and to this culture. And this is what John Paul II is telling us about. This is what Pope Benedict, in his new encyclical, God is Love, is telling us too. He's also telling us that we're with this powerful, beautiful calling to one another and to this culture. All right, let me review with you some of John Paul's ideas about these three areas of love in our marriages. These three areas which we are called to address and to think about in terms of the needs of our spouse, to think about our spouses and their needs and our calling here. So first, romantic love. Maybe you could think back to the first time you really had strong romantic feelings for your husband or your wife. And how wonderful that experience is. It's almost a foretaste of eternity. You feel like you're being swept up in this wonderful, powerful experience of love that is so important. And so many people just get swept away by it. Our will is captured by emotions and sensations. So very powerful in making us feel very close to the person we love. But as John Paul II, it's not the whole of love. It's extremely important. It's very important. And it must be nurtured and taken care of to the whole course of married life. But it's really a signal to us that a friendship can be developed. But as John Paul II writes, romantic love is one step short of friendship. The romantic love is meant to take us into friendship. And then the romantic love and friendship together take us into betrothed love. Takes us into the total unity. Takes us into the love of marriage, where then the friendship and the romantic love, these are supported by the grace of a sacrament. Remember, people have written that it's really the grace of the sacrament that supports romantic. It's not our love that supports the sacrament. It's the grace of the sacrament that supports the romantic love and the deep friendship that's meant to exist. Unfortunately, in many studies that are done of marriages, you ask couples, well, who's your closest friend? Unfortunately, in a number of studies, the spouse is not mentioned as the closest friend. And something's wrong here. Our spouse is meant to be our closest friend. That's our calling, to have our spouse as our closest friend. This can be really enriched by one's friendship with the Lord, because a lot of things happen to us, and we'll talk about it, that can weaken, our friendship. Things that we bring into our marriage, weaknesses in trusting, anger, disappointments with our parents, hurts in previous relationships. Numerous things can happen to us that can weaken our friendships. I recall on the first date I had with Adele. She lived in Manhattan. I met her at a conference I was participating in at Georgetown. And after lunch, we took a walk around St. Patrick's. And at that time in St. Patrick's, they were having a display of the little flower. I don't know if you saw that. It was a year-long display of the little flower, life of the little flower. And at the very last sort of station, there was, I forget what picture of the little flower, but next to that was a placard with the words on it, "Trust and only trust should lead to love." Little flower's words. Now, many people today enter romantic love, they move into sexual intimacy, they don't even know the person, they don't even trust the person. The person's not really, in fact, is not trustworthy. And they make that move. They don't realize the enormous mistake they're making. So the foundation for the true friendship, now moving beyond just the emotional, powerful experiences of love into a friendship, which is based upon communication, but the friendship is based upon deep trust. We have to have very deep trust to have a true friendship. And this side of heaven, all of us have our trust hurt in different ways. We can have it hurt by our fathers growing up. My grandfather contracted it should have been called the Chinese flu, it was called the Spanish flu, from pigs to human beings. The same type of dynamic they're worried about today with the bird flu. My grandfather was a healthy man, 5 young children, and 36 hours later he was dead. And so my father had this good man, a strong man, but because his father died suddenly when he was 4, thank God my grandfather had some small, moderate, some apartments, so that otherwise he would have gone into an orphanage. But he could overreact because of what happened to him as a child. And then I became aware, I became a psychiatrist. I thought, oh, wait a minute here. Guess what I picked up? And so I'm citing that as an example because many of us can have things that happen to us along the way, our work, our experience with a father, a mother, a brother, or sister, they can shake and trust. And then what happens? You get some stress in your life, in your marriage, in your work, and this pain that hasn't been healed comes up, and you pull away from your husband or your wife, or you pull away from your children. And so that it profoundly weakens the basic ability to really to love and to give yourself in a deep friendship. John Paul II writes that it's this friendship, in fact, even before the marital union, it's this friendship, it's this deep friendship that creates true unification in marriage. That this deep friendship is essential to a true unification. The Holy Father, in his new encyclical, God is Love, has written this. This is from the 6th section. He's talking about love moving from eros or romantic love or into deeper love. And in this area of friendship, and Pope Benedict writes this, love now becomes concern and care for the other. No longer is it just self-seeking, because in the romantic love, oftentimes we are experiencing such pleasure that the danger is it becomes selfish. We can turn in if we focus on that too much. As he writes, a sinking into, he calls it, the intoxication of happiness. Just this wonderful experience of happiness. But here in friendship, we move beyond ourselves, because romantic love can make us, if we focus on it too much, it can turn us in. And we move here, John Benedict writes, because we seek here in true friendship, we seek the good of the beloved. We move beyond, we become concerned about the good of the beloved, the needs, the good of the beloved. And then love becomes in a certain way a renunciation, and as well is ready and even willing to sacrifice, to give ourselves to the person that we love, to make that sacrifice. This weakness in being willing to give to the other is one of the major reasons why marriages end within the first 5 years. This is one of the primary reasons why they end in the first 5 years. People don't understand marriage. They understand the calling to giving. They think it's, well, my pleasure, my happiness, but the truth is in friendships we are willing to sacrifice and to really give to the other. Now this friendship is, John Paul II writes, it is very dependent on the emotional warmth supplied by romantic love. Otherwise, unless the friendship is being fed by romantic love, by good communication, then it becomes cold and incommunicable. Okay, so these two processes that John Paul II writes in Love and Responsibility, romantic love and friendship, are two distinct processes frequently going on at the same time. They interpenetrate each other, and this is really the art of love. And John Paul II writes that true love is the transformation of romantic love into friendship. That's what he would refer to as true love, that we really give ourselves to the other. And with this, there's a strong sense of responsibility. I mean, this culture says to us, you're not responsible for the happiness of your wife. You're not responsible for other people's happiness. John Paul II writes just the opposite. He writes just the opposite, that you are responsible for the happiness of the other. This is why in the young mental health field that I'm in, that when you look at couples that are in conflict, okay, the prevalence of depressive illness, the prevalence of anxiety disorders is like 10 to 25 times higher than those couples who aren't in conflict. So we certainly are responsible to try for one another's well-being. We're meant to attend to that, be very careful about that. John Paul II writes something which is really incredible. See, the culture says, find your own happiness, seek pleasure. And John Paul II writes, the greater the feeling of responsibility for the person, the more true love there is. And I think his framework for that is what he's written in, I say he wrote it, maybe he didn't, but he certainly quoted it many times, the Second Vatican Council, that a person, you can't find yourself unless you give yourself. It's only that in giving yourself you find yourself. If you don't give yourself, this is why, quite frankly, the most beautiful city of the world, Paris, okay, here's the most beautiful city of the world, guess what? Paris has the highest prevalence of the use of antidepressants of any city in the world. So here you have the most beautiful city in the world that consumes 3 and 4 times the amount of antidepressants that many other cities in the world consume. Why is that? I've had some college students say, everything is fine, good family, friends, everything is fine. Why am I depressed? What are you doing with your life? Well, something's missing here. And you're not going to be fulfilled unless you're giving. Unless you're giving, you're going to be restless. You're going to be unhappy, because that's the calling deep within our nature. That's how God makes us. That's how we're model the Trinity. Give yourself. Give yourself in marriages. Give yourself to your children. Give yourself in your community. So let's talk about romantic love a little bit more. John Paul II writes a few issues about the caution. By the way, much of this that I'm saying here is on our website under a heading, maritalhealing.com, under a heading John Paul II and marital love. So the caution with romantic love, as important as it is, a caution here is that some people move to marry before and they do not have a true friendship. And some people think when they lose the feeling of romantic love, that true love is over. This becomes a basis for divorce. They lose the feeling of romantic love and they go, love must be over. They don't understand, like in this handout that I gave you, that many different things, anger, acting like a parent, anxiety, selfishness, having not the proper balance in your life, working too hard, having too many athletic activities programmed into family life, all these things pull husbands and wives away from each other. And so then romantic love suffers because there's a lack of knowledge about what's at war with this romantic love, what's interfering with this romantic love. So John Paul II writes, romantic love is very important, but it should not become the end of love itself. It is not the end of love itself. True betrothed love is the end of love itself. That's when you completely give yourself to the other and you receive from the other within the sacrament of marriage, and that love mirrors Trinitarian love when children come and you give yourself completely to your spouse and completely to your children. Again, repeat John Paul II's comment, true love is the transformation of romantic love into friendship. Then moves on to betrothed love. I don't know if many of you read the Magnificat yesterday. Did you? Well, anyway, Adele, my wife, brought me this one section. I had part of this. John Paul II writes, the gospel yesterday was about marriage and that it's meant to last. And in this commentary was the section on betrothed love from Love and Responsibility. And this is a little bit deep. Let me read this to you. It's almost the same notes I have here. But John Paul II writes in Love and Responsibility about true unification. Well, it develops by attraction, desire, and goodwill within the person. And true unification of persons takes place when people focus on the we, not on the I, but on the we. So we move from romantic love, we focus on we, husband and wife. What are his needs? What are her needs? I want to give and receive in this area. Selfishness is one of the major things that blocks us from doing that. And guess what? This side of heaven, all of us have it. I mean, all of us have a struggle in that area. It's like a little demon. We got to kick away, try to think about growing in generosity. Let me read this to you, what John Paul II wrote, though. See my work. In a number of marital conferences I've given, day-long conferences, the conference begins not with me. The conference begins with my wife. My wife is an educator, and she does the first talk on love and responsibility. I come in with the pain and how the pain can be healed. She begins in a lovely way, the lovely woman, oftentimes opens up to audiences more. But at any rate, so here's Adele's piece. Betrothed love differs from all other forms of love. It is decisive in character. It is the giving of one's own person to another. The essence of betrothed love is self-giving, the surrender of my I, of who I am. This is something different from and more than attraction, desire, goodwill. There are always ways by which one person goes out towards another, but none of them can make him as far in his quest for the good of the other as does betrothed love. To give oneself to another is something more than merely desiring what is good for another, even if it is the result of this another I. When betrothed love enters into this interpersonal relationship, something more than friendship results. The two people give themselves each to the other. What is impossible and illegitimate in the natural order and in the physical sense can come about in the order of love in a moral sense. In this sense, one person can give himself or herself, can surrender entirely to another, whether to a human person or to God. And such a giving of the self creates a special form of love, which we define as betrothed love. This fact goes to prove that the person has a dynamism of its own, and that special laws govern its existence and evolution. The fullest, the most uncompromising form of love consists precisely in self-giving, in making one's I someone else's property, in giving yourself completely to the other. This is doubly paradoxical. Firstly, in that it is possible to step outside of one's own I in this way, and secondly, in that the I, far from being destroyed or impaired as a result, is enlarged and enriched, of course, in a superphysical or moral sense. So that this self-giving doesn't limit us. This self-giving doesn't impoverish us. It enriches us. It strengthens us. It makes us, well, in a spiritual sense, it makes us more like Christ. We become more like Him. Of course, this is what, to really have a healthy marriage, we have to have a healthy personality. Well, how do we have a healthy personality? We have a healthy personality by looking at our weaknesses on the one hand and growing in virtues on the other hand. So what's the weakness? Okay, over here. Here are the virtues over here that we can use to diminish the weaknesses here. And so John Paul II has given this wonderful understanding of human love, this framework that I think I use it regularly in the course of my work, almost, well, not 30 years, because document is not 30 years, but for quite a long time. Let me mention something else about this betrothed love that the Holy Father pleasantly writes about in God is Love. He takes it to another level. He says that love looks to the eternal. Love is indeed ecstasy, not in the sense of a moment of intoxication, but rather as a journey, an ongoing exodus out of the closed, inward-looking self towards authentic self-discovery, indeed, and the very discovery of God. Okay, so this is the calling we have, and these are different aspects of giving. Let me talk now a little bit about some of the weaknesses that interfere with this. I mentioned a couple of them earlier. This sort of depressing handout, conflicts in self-giving. Most of us have some of these conflicts at times, and it can be helpful just to recognize what conflicts we have. See, many of us have these weaknesses when we enter our marriages, and we're not even aware of them. This is why I'm hoping in the future we can have a little more sophisticated premarital programs, where people can look at themselves and think, all right, I bring a lot of gifts into this marriage that God has given me. For example, what's the weakness, what's the predominant weakness my father has? What's the predominant weakness my mother has? And I want to overcome that weakness. I want to look at that and know it. Because if I don't, the chances are very high that you're going to repeat it in your marriage. You're not even going to know you're repeating it in your marriage. Okay? So, what are the common ones in terms of parental legacies? Well, that in terms of romantic love, that many women, because of their background with their role models, with their mothers, oftentimes have a greater freedom in communicating affection than many of us men do in our role models with our fathers. And in fact, in 30 years, probably the single most common issue that I deal with in marital relationships that relate to the romantic side and the friendship side are weaknesses that we men acquire from our fathers in terms of difficulty in praising and complimenting, because our fathers were not praised and complimented by their fathers. I can recall my own father at a couple of emotional moments saying, because he lost his father as a child, that for him, priests were his role models. He would look to priests, because we all need role models. We all need people to model after. And so it's interesting, last month in Manhattan when I was making this point, and during the discussion period, one young woman, about, not say early 30s, commented that things have changed, she said to me. Maybe you're accurate about men who are older, but he said, I want to tell you something. And women, a number of women my age, that many of them will say, my mother is crazy. And what does that mean? There's been a major shift in terms of women's role models. Because women used to have role models of, from a Christian perspective, Catholic perspective, Mary, giving. But now, I just want to elaborate. I said, what do you mean by that? Well, many of my friends have mothers who are extremely selfish. Extremely selfish. And because they're selfish, they're crazy. They're not there, So, that's interesting. That's sort of newer phenomenon that's occurring as the culture has more and more trouble. Okay, so romantic love, so these weaknesses in maintaining romantic love oftentimes come, our busy schedules, our stresses. One of the comments is disordered self-giving, a lack of balance in life, not setting aside time, for romantic time, not special time for spouse, not special giving, work stress. For some, the use of oral contraceptives interferes with the romantic love. How? Here's how. Because you sometimes, with using oral contraceptives, you take intimate love for granted. Well, I'm entitled to be intimate with my wife tonight. To talk to her, watch sports all night. I'm entitled to it. It's my right. No, if you don't have healthy romantic love and a healthy friendship, you shouldn't expect to have an intimate. You're not going to have a healthy intimate relationship. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And so we have to have healthy romantic love. We have to have a good friendship in order to have healthy betrothed love, in order to have a good, healthy, intimate relationship with our spouses. And of course, this latter, betrothed love, is, we know from a number of studies, enriched by faith. There were a number of studies that have shown that couples who go to church together on Sundays. This is a study of Christians, Catholics and non-Catholics, Protestants. The couples who go to church together on Sunday report enjoying the greatest degree of marital happiness and the greatest degree of sexual satisfaction in their marriage. So why would that be? Probably because they're two different sources of love you can rely on. You're not just making the spouse the God. That's a great danger. When you rely too much on romantic love, you can, just everything on a human level, you must make your spouse your God. That the spouse has got to be everything for me. And again, many of us bring into our marriages, can bring in a certain sadness, not enough father love, not enough mother love, and spousal love comes in on the adult level. Spousal love can't go back and fill up what you didn't get from a mother or father. And this is a reason why, in the past, many people could feel a certain loneliness in their marriage, but they would persevere with their faith. But that's changed today. So people feel an unhappiness. Oh, it must be my spouse. Here's a person who was never held enough by a father, never comforted by a mother, brings into their marriage a significant unhappiness, a significant degree of loneliness, and the spousal love doesn't heal it. They don't know that, and they end their marriages. And they go on, and oftentimes the same thing happens again. The divorce rate in second marriages is, 60% or higher. So, and again, self-knowledge can be helpful, to look at ourselves and to think, all right, what are some of my weaknesses, and I want to work to overcome them. And my hope here today had been that you could just be open to look at yourselves and look at any weaknesses you may have, or it's easier to look at our spouse and think, okay, he's got this weakness, she's got that weakness, honey, you better work on it, And Rick Fitzgibbons says I think you read on it, and they might, and so the whole another issue comes up here about correction. If we're here today looking at this issues on giving, and you see in your spouse, yourself or your spouse, some weaknesses in this area, what are you supposed to do about that? Well, many people say do nothing, but St. Paul says, in wisdom made perfect, correct and admonish one another. So I think the encouragement to correction is important. I came from a family background with my mother never corrected my father. That didn't happen. And so it was quite an adjustment in my marriage when the send my way a few gentle corrections. She grew up in a family where her parents were very involved in Opus Dei, the prelature of Opus Dei. In Opus Dei, fraternal correction is extremely important, because it's a sign of love. I treated a number of males in their late teens, early 20s, involved in all sorts of substance abuse, promiscuity, etc., and their fathers did nothing to correct them strongly, And in their early 20s, they were furious with their fathers. Why didn't he hammer me? Why didn't he come down on me really hard? And so correction is important. And so if we look at some of these issues around romantic love and friendship and betrothed love, sometimes we have to, first, when you correct, it should be done gently. So how do you correct? First, you should do it gently. And sometimes you can even share your own weakness. Well, I have this weakness. Maybe you have that weakness to work on. But it should be done like that sandwich technique. Praise, a little constructive criticism, praise. It's more tolerable, more acceptable to take it in that way. Let me mention one of the major obstacles to romantic love is the area that I've done a lot of work in is anger. Okay. My own view is this, that anger should not be expressed in marriages. That Christ became angry, but he usually became angry. Okay, he became angry at Peter. He became angry over something which was evil, the temple being changed into a den of iniquity. But we should try not to express anger with our spouses, particularly in front of our children. So basically, there are three things we can do with anger. We can deny anger, we can express anger, or we can forgive. Deny it, express it, forgive. You know what? Many of us bring into our marriages a significant amount of denied anger. Anger occurs, we get hurt, disappointed, sad, then mad. Okay? So things happen with our parents, things happen with our siblings, things can happen with people, we dated before or cared about, denied. Okay? So then in marriage, when you perceive insensitive treatment, oh, she's insensitive to me, oh, he's insensitive to me, that can touch what you're not even aware of, insensitive treatment in the past, and then the response is exaggerated. The response can be an exaggerated anger towards your husband or towards your wife. So I'm suggesting you deny anger, but that when you feel angry towards a husband or a wife, you think to yourself, okay, I want to try to be understanding of him or her. I want to inwardly think about forgiving him or her, try to forgive them. Because if you think about forgiving, your anger is going to diminish. Do that inwardly. You think about forgiving, it diminishes. Or you think when you do that, I want to forgive my husband or wife for being insensitive, and I want to forgive other people in my past who were insensitive to me. Could be a boss, could be a mother, could be a father, could be a brother or sister. And so you can get like what John Paul II referred to as a purification of the memory. You know, we all have this important aspect of our being, our memory. And John Paul II wrote that unless you forgive, you become a prisoner of your past. You become imprisoned. Your past controls you. People are gone who hurt you, but they have some controlling influence on you because of what happened to you in your past. And so even the purification of the memory of a marriage can be important. You're thinking about asking forgiveness, granting forgiveness for hurts in the past. But if we can try to be forgiving regularly, you know, and for some couples, Catholic couples, the sacrament of reconciliation helps with that process. The second issue is trusting. In the young mental health field, there have been a number of big conferences. Presidents of the American Psychological Association have given talks entitled The Terrible Twos. No, they're not the twos you think about. The terrible twos are mistrust and anger. Terrible twos. These terrible twos damage us. There's all sorts of research showing how they damage us, our cardiovascular system, our heart, our blood pressure. So if we can control our anger, we can diminish our anger, and if we can protect our trust, we have much greater likelihood of having self-giving, loving marital relationships. John Paul II, in one of his documents, Faith and Reason, showing how faith and reason belong together, wrote that men and women are on a journey of discovery which is humanly unstoppable, a search for the truth and a search for a person to whom they can entrust themselves. So we're all on a search for a human being to whom we can entrust ourselves. We want to entrust ourselves. Just as babies, we didn't make the decision, but we entrusted ourselves to the love of our mother, primarily our mothers first, and our fathers. So we're on this search. But different things happen, wounds occur that weaken this ability to trust. And this trust is essential to loving. I sometimes think in spiritual terms that it's an area of warfare, because if our trust is damaged, the response is fight or flight. So if our trust is damaged in our marriages, we're going to put up walls, we're going to pull away, we're not going to talk, we're not going to sit down at the dinner table and think, oh, I want to communicate some nice things to my wife, to my husband, to my children today. No, we're going to pull in to kind of protect ourselves. So trusting is very, very important. And, and the good thing is that our trust, no matter how it's been damaged in our marriage, or before our marriage, or in our work, or in personal relationships, it can be rebuilt. One priest told me that he'd heard that John Paul II thought that the image of Jesus Christ given to St. Faustina, you know, Jesus, I trust in you, that the Holy Father thought that that was the image of Christ for our times. Because we live in a time of profound mistrust. You know, the collapse of marriages, the collapse of moral values, numerous things are happening. I mean, companies, employers used to be committed to employees. You know, and the whole commitment process is severely damaged. So it can be very helpful in your marriage to think every day, like, I want to trust my husband. But this trust on a human level can be really enriched by spiritual trust. So if you can, in your spiritual life, begin your day thinking, well, Lord, I want to trust you. That faith can really enrich our marriages tremendously and our intellects. We can think, I want to begin my day trusting you, Lord, with myself, with my marriage, with my children. That strengthens you to trust your spouse. And it helps you, too, to sort of rise above the hurts of the past. In your marriage, with your father, with your mother, different hurts in the past. And we have a culture today where many people are in the complete victim role. You know, oh, I was a victim of an insensitive father. I was a victim of an insensitive mother. But, you know, we all have virtues we can grow in, both human virtues and theological virtues that can keep us trusting. I mean, many, well, I can tell you, I mentioned earlier, maybe a weakness that many men have is modeling after a father who was not difficulty communicating affection and love. A weakness many women have is that they didn't feel safe with their fathers. And so this weakens betrothed love. This weakens the ability to receive the love of a husband because of that weakness. So for many men, it can be very helpful to think, I want to be more giving than my father was emotionally, or to think, Lord, help me to be more giving. Or many Catholic men think about St. Joseph as another role model for self-giving. And the same thing applies to women, to think, Lord, help me to feel safer with my husband. I didn't feel safe with my father because of his drinking or because of his bad temper. And a lot of this is completely unconscious. People are not aware that these things are going on deep within their hearts that limit their giving and their receiving. Okay, the good thing is, I don't be too positive here. I mean, the good thing is that these weaknesses that we all have, the good news is they can be resolved. They can be resolved. So I'll tell you what if we do this? What if I'd be interested in this, and well, we're going to open this up now, okay? So, and then we'll some other